The cards slapped on the table. Laughter filled the room. It was Friday night. Pizza boxes lay open. Empty soda cans littered the coffee table. Four friends, Sarah, John, Emily and Chris, were in a heated Uno battle. "Draw four!" Sarah yelled, grinning. John groaned. He drew the cards. His hand was terrible. "Reverse!" Emily slammed a card down. The game continued, playful banter filling the room. Nobody noticed the flickering lights. Nobody noticed the strange silence from the street outside. John reached for his drink, fingers brushing against something cold and clammy. He pulled his hand back. Chris, eyes glazed over, stared straight ahead. He dropped a card. "Your turn, Chris," Emily said, but Chris didn't move. "Dude, you okay?" John asked, a knot of worry forming in his stomach. Chris slowly turned his head towards John. His eyes were vacant, pupils dilated. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Guys, something's wrong," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Chris lunged. He knocked over the table, cards scattering across the floor. John and Emily screamed, scrambling back. Sarah froze, paralyzed with fear. Chris grabbed John's arm, teeth bared. John cried out in pain. "Chris, stop!" Sarah screamed. But it wasn't Chris anymore. His face was contorted in a grotesque snarl. His eyes burned with a strange hunger. Emily grabbed a soda can and hurled it at Chris. Her hands were trembling and her eyes were wide with fear. She hoped the impact would slow him down, give them a chance to escape. It bounced harmlessly off his head. He didn't even flinch. Chris's expression remained cold and unyielding, as if he was impervious to pain or emotion. The soda can clattered to the floor, rolling away into the shadows. John, seeing Emily's futile attempt, mustered all his strength and shoved Chris back with all his might. The force of the push sent Chris stumbling, but he quickly regained his balance, his eyes now filled with a menacing glare. "We gotta get out of here!" John yelled, his voice cracking with urgency and fear. The walls seemed to close in around them, the air thick with tension and dread. They scrambled to their feet, racing for the front door. Each step felt like a marathon, their legs heavy with exhaustion and terror. The hallway stretched endlessly before them, every second feeling like an eternity. The house was eerily silent, except for the sounds of their own ragged breathing and the pounding of their hearts. The silence was deafening, amplifying their fear. Shadows danced on the walls, creating an illusion of movement that made their skin crawl. Sarah fumbled with the lock, her fingers shaking uncontrollably. The doorknob rattled as she struggled to turn it, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen if they couldn't get out in time. Finally, the door swung open with a creak that echoed through the silent house. A rush of cool night air hit their faces, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. They burst outside into the night, their hearts still pounding. The darkness enveloped them, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the terror they had just escaped. They didn't stop running, their feet pounding against the pavement, driven by the adrenaline coursing through their veins. The street was in chaos. People ran screaming, cars collided in the street, fires burned in the distance, and everywhere there were things. Things that looked human but moved with an unnatural, jerky gait. Their eyes glowed with a terrifying hunger. "What's happening?" Sarah cried, her voice lost in the pandemonium. "I don't know," John said, his face grim. "But we have to keep moving." They ran, dodging panicked neighbors and swerving around abandoned cars. The world they knew was gone. The news reports were fragmented, chaotic. A virus, highly contagious, spread through bites. The infected turned, violent. The city was under quarantine, all flights grounded, roads closed. John and Emily huddled around a flickering television in a looted convenience store. Sarah stared out the window, her face pale. Chris, or whatever he had become, was gone, lost in the chaos. "We're trapped," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Outside, the screams continued. The city was under siege. Days turned into weeks. The virus spread, cities fell silent. The once bustling streets, filled with the sounds of life and laughter, now echoed with an eerie silence. The virus showed no mercy, sparing no one in its path. The vibrant cityscapes, once the heart of the nation, were now ghost towns with only the wind whispering through the empty buildings. The countryside became a desolate wasteland, littered with abandoned cars and the walking dead. Fields that once flourished with crops now lay barren, overrun by the undead. The rural areas, once a symbol of peace and tranquility, had transformed into a haunting landscape of decay and despair. The few survivors who remained were constantly on the move, trying to stay one step ahead of the relentless horde. John, Sarah and Emily had found refuge in an old farmhouse, miles from any town. The farmhouse, though dilapidated, offered a semblance of safety. Its creaking walls and broken windows were a stark contrast to the life they once knew, but it was their sanctuary. They had fortified it as best as they could, using whatever materials they could scavenge. It wasn't much, but it was home. They scavenged for food, weapons, anything to survive. Every trip outside was a gamble, a dangerous game of life and death. They had to be quick, silent, and always on guard. The world outside was unforgiving, and one wrong move could mean the end. They had learned to adapt, to be resourceful, and to rely on each other. Trust was their most valuable asset. The world they knew was gone, replaced by a nightmare. How could this happen? The question lingered in their minds, a constant reminder of the life they had lost. The ruins of the old world stood as a testament to the fragility of civilization. The memories of their past lives haunted them, but they had no choice but to keep moving forward. Survival was their only option. Sarah asked one night, staring into the dying embers of their fire. It doesn't matter anymore, she thought, but the question still burned within her. The fire's warmth was a small comfort in the cold, harsh reality they faced. The nights were the hardest, filled with the sounds of distant groans and the ever-present fear of what lurked in the darkness. John said, his voice hollow. He had seen too much, lost too much. The weight of their situation bore heavily on him, but he knew he had to stay strong for Sarah and Emily. They looked to him for guidance, for hope. He couldn't afford to show weakness, even though the burden was almost too much to bear. All that matters is surviving. They had to keep going, to find a way to live in this new world. Every day was a battle, but they faced it together. Their determination was their greatest strength, and as long as they had each other, they had a chance. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to face whatever came their way. One day, while scavenging in a deserted town, the air was thick with the scent of decay and the eerie silence of abandonment. The streets, once bustling with life, now lay in ruins, a stark reminder of the world that once was. Amidst the rubble, they picked up a faint radio signal. A group of survivors, their faces etched with the hardships they had endured, gathered around the crackling device. The signal was weak, but it was a beacon of hope in their desolate existence. Holed up in a military base, they had found temporary refuge. The base, once a symbol of strength and security, now served as their last bastion against the chaos outside. Its walls, though weathered, provided a semblance of safety. They were looking for others, hoping to rebuild. Every day was a struggle for survival, but the thought of finding more survivors kept them going. They strategized, planned, and dreamed of a day when they could start anew. Hope flickered in Sarah's eyes for the first time in weeks. The radio signal was a sign, a glimmer of possibility in a world overshadowed by despair. She clung to that hope, her heart yearning for a better tomorrow. It was a long shot, a dangerous journey fraught with unknown perils. The path ahead was treacherous, filled with obstacles that could easily end their quest. Yet the promise of finding others, of rebuilding their shattered lives, was worth the risk. But it was a chance to escape the nightmare that had become their reality. They knew the odds were against them, but the human spirit is resilient, and they were determined to take that leap of faith, a chance to escape the nightmare. "We have to try," Sarah said, her voice firm. Her determination was infectious, igniting a spark of courage in the hearts of those around her. She said, her voice firm. Her words resonated with the group, each member feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They had been through so much, but this was their moment to fight back, to reclaim their lives. John and Emily exchanged a look. They knew the risks, The journey could be their last, but the alternative was a slow, inevitable decline into oblivion. They had to make a choice, and they chose hope. But they also saw the hope in Sarah's eyes. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to bind them together, to give them the strength to face the unknown. In that moment, they were not just survivors. They were a family, united by a shared dream of a brighter future. Packing their meagre supplies, they set out the next morning. The journey was fraught with danger. Hordes of the undead roamed the highways and byways. Food and water were scarce, but they pressed on, driven by the faint signal on the radio and the hope it represented. They were not alone. Other survivors, hardened and desperate, crossed their path. Some were friendly, willing to share what little they had. Others were hostile, driven mad by the horrors they had witnessed. The radio signal grew stronger with each passing day. Hope fueled their weary steps. But as they neared the coordinates of the military base, a sense of unease settled over them. The air was thick with the stench of decay. The silence was broken only by the moans of the undead. What awaited them at the military base? Would they find sanctuary or another nightmare? They were about to find out.